ahead, Dr. Begay.
Okay, let's get started. So welcome everyone to our second session for Native American Heritage Month. I'm Missy Begay and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Internal Medicine. So I have the great privilege today to welcome Dr. Mary Owen. And Mary Owen is a member of the Tlingit Nation. She graduated from the University of Minnesota Medical School and North Memorial Family Practice Residency Program before returning home to work for her tribal community in Juneau, Alaska. After 11 years of full-scope family medicine, she returned to the University of Minnesota Medical School in Duluth in 2014 as the director of the Center of American Indian and Minority Health. Her work includes developing and managing programs to increase the numbers of American Indians and Alaska Native students entering medical careers, outreach to local and national Native leaders to assure that the Center for American Indian Health and the University of Minnesota Medical School remain in tune with Native healthcare and educational needs, developing a Native track for all students interested in providing healthcare to Native communities, and developing research efforts to address Native health disparities. She continues to provide clinical care at the Center of American Indian Resources in Duluth. I'm so privileged to know Mary, and we both sit on the board of the Association of American Indian Physicians. So I'm so happy that you're here, Mary.
Miigwech, Chargunischish, thank you, Dr. Begay. I am privileged to work with Dr. Begay on the board. It's fun having someone with a similar vision, I think, for expanding our reach and our voices for our communities and for the benefit of our communities. I think I'm going to do this one a little bit differently, folks, in that I'm going to give you a story, tell you my story of how I got here. And then after that, I'll be open for questions. When we do questions, I will ask you guys to turn on so I can read your faces a little bit. It's so much harder to do this presentation and not be able to read body language and faces. And if you're looking quizzical, then I can go to you and say, what's going on? What are you thinking about? Then we have a better conversation. So, all right. So my name is, I'll just start out. Blue dash, uchat du asal kushkitanach, site chedach, chet hidach, ayachat, akwandach, ayachat. My name is Ludash. I was named after my grandmother, Marie James. And I'm from the Thunderbird House of the Shark Clan of the Akwon tribe of the Tlingit people from Southeast Alaska. I currently work, as you heard from the introduction, at the University of Minnesota Medical School, where I attended many years ago, but I was raised in Southeast Alaska. And I didn't do very well in high school. I was just trying to figure out, I was in advanced classes, but didn't do very well in those classes, and really trying to figure out who I was. And I ended up going to one of the colleges in a private college because of state loans. I was able to get those. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to afford to go to college, having been raised in poverty, like 4 different trailer courts and lots of different houses, and just not the wealthy lifestyle that you usually expect from folks who've gone to medical school. Anyway, got accepted at the last minute to a private school in the middle of Montana and got a degree in international relations and French. I have no idea what was on my mind, maybe be a French diplomat with a degree from the middle of the country, but that's the degree I went for. And, like all of those bachelor's of arts degrees, they kind of expand your mind in different ways. And so that part was fun, lots of history. And that's in fact where I really gained my strength in being Native, because in high school, it was trying to fit in. That was really difficult with all the racism that existed in Juneau. Juneau is about, I think, 12% Native people. So you see brown people everywhere. We don't have the same reservation system, but there's very much a status issue there, and Natives are at the bottom of that in that community. So got some empowerment from going to college and learning about the true history, and then went back to Alaska, where I got the series of jobs that you often get when you have a bachelor's degree that don't allow you much autonomy and control of your life, and realized I needed to go back to school. Was getting my health care from the Alaska Native Medical Center at that time, and looking around, realized that we didn't have much representation in with the healthcare providers. And I wanted to, it just fit. I realized that we had low representation. I was decent in school, so I went back and to the University of Oregon to get my undergraduate work done, and then looked around for a school that would fit me, a school that served Native people. I knew that when I entered the program, or when I went back to school, that I only wanted to go back and serve my community. I wanted to work for my tribe and provide healthcare there, because I knew there were a lot of other students who had similar experiences as mine, and I wanted to serve them. So found the University of Minnesota, where there was a gentleman named Dr. Gerald Hill. And Dr. Hill, for those of you who don't know him, is an emergency room doctor who is sharp as a tack, and so insightful and so empowered and willing to tell other people why we have a right to do everything that we're doing to gain control of for our communities and to take in providing healthcare for our communities. So because he was here, I chose this school because I knew that I would be going to a program that could help build all those skills in me. And it was lonely here. It was mostly white students, and the other natives, for the most part, who had been accepted, a lot of them were people who were not in connection with their community. And those who were, some of them just didn't have the same adamant views about our rights as Native people that I did. Leave it there. So that made it kind of lonely. I remember some racist acts that happened in school, and my writing a letter and getting others to sign it because I felt that it wasn't a fair learning environment. And not all the Native students signed it. Some of the white students did. I ended up sending it in to the deans, and one of the deans responded and said, "Are you happy now? You've changed this professor's life by having complained about him." And what he said was blatantly racist, as racist as anything you've heard. So it definitely was the right thing to do, but it wasn't without repercussion. And then I started getting anonymous notes in my box that I was affecting somebody's life and blah, 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 blah. And so it just, it was a tough time to get through without that support, and either from other students or from the faculty, but got through there. Then came the time to apply for residency. And here's a mistake I think I made, or something that I think, this is one of the few things that I think I would change in my life. And I chose a residency program because my family had already moved, and we had a daughter. My husband and I had a daughter. We'd already moved to go to medical school in the Midwest from the Pacific Coast. And then we'd moved after 2 years down to the Twin Cities, because you complete your 2 years down there with the University of Minnesota. And he didn't want to move again. And he would have done whatever I asked. He was a very supportive partner. But I didn't push and go to the Seattle Indian Health Board, where I think I would have had a lot more support. Instead, I stayed here and went to a program called North Memorial. And there were no other natives. There were no African Americans. There were no other residents of color at all, or even people who were from impoverished communities. So nobody I could relate to. And we all know how residency can be incredibly demanding, so much more so than medical school. So the time that I needed it the most, it wasn't available. And yeah, that's something that one of my big recommendations is find the programs that support you. You have to have it during these really tough times to survive them and to keep want to go on. I think I ended up developing pretty profound depression, right? Like within the first 2 months. And also because residency was the way it was. And I think to some extent, some of them still are, where we don't address mental health and disability in the way that we need to in such a setting. And so I turned to classmates because I didn't think I could leave without leaving that work on the shoulders of someone else, which now I know, of course, was a mistake, but it didn't feel like we had a lot of options. So got through residency, as difficult as that was. The beauty of that program, though, was that it was in the middle of Minneapolis, and we served primarily African-American and Hmong patients. So for that reason, I think I gained a lot. I love that part of it. But I still would have liked to have more support during those really tough times. Applied to my own tribe. I knew I'd been doing externships at my own tribal clinic and knew that I was going to return. And sure enough, even during residency, they were calling me saying, when are you going to get here? They wanted me to come home as much as I wanted to be home. And just to be aware, or to think about as a Native person, when you get into medical school, you got here because you're Native. When you get a scholarship, you got it because you're Native. When you get a jobs offered to you immediately, even before you graduated from residency, it's because you're Native. That's what's told to you, or at least it was to me. I don't know if it's the same still. That was my experience. When I got a lot of patients, which naturally I did because I went home and because I'm fairly good with people, it was only because I was Native. Bad things happen, it's because I was Native. So, there's a little bit of dealing with that. And so you need to find the supports around you because you're going to continue to get those messages, I think. And from what I'm hearing from students, they're experiencing some of the same. So the beauty of going back to my tribal clinic was that, it was the best part. It was better than graduating from medical school for me. It was going home. It was getting to take care of the families that I'd grown up with. It's hard to explain what that feels like. And it was the other beauty was seeing those individual patients and knowing that I might be, it's not good that I was the only person, but at least being one person who celebrated them and helped them address the shame that they were feeling about being Native or losing their children or anything else terrible that we know now is likely due in part to that intergenerational trauma that they had experienced. So just lifting some of that off their shoulders and reaffirming their rights and their humanity and their goodness, to me, was one of the best experiences over and over and over. The drawbacks were, because my family had been, that was where my family was from, and they were a very political family. My mom and my grandma were always involved in Native politics. Occasionally, I'd have to explain to a patient, look, our family's politics have nothing to do with the care that I'm providing you. You are my patient, bottom line, and I'm going to treat you as good as I possibly can. So having to navigate that when you go home, I think is something to be aware of. The hard parts were that I was so busy. I was on call every 6th night and every 6th weekend on average. I was exhausted. So I didn't have nearly the amount of time that I would like to invest in my community and politics and activism that I love, that keeps me alive. Additionally, I was just talking about this with my husband. I think I've realized that one of the reasons I was afraid to dive much into more of our cultural events, I did attend potlatches with my mom, things like that are important to us, but I was definitely guarded. I was afraid that if I started getting more involved, more people would ask me to do things, more people would ask more of me, and I didn't have any more to give. I was exhausted all the time. Raising my child, having a relationship with my partner, trying to stay sane and keeping exercise, those were some bottom line important pieces for me. And I was afraid that if I got involved, more people would be calling me, as did happen occasionally, and saying, can you help me with this? And I'm unable to say no when a community member reaches out to me and asks me for something. So I was afraid of all of that. The other problem, besides being exhausted, was that I've never felt like, I never had autonomy in that job. I didn't have as much autonomy as I needed. So for instance, the calls would come from up above that we would have to shorten our clinic times with our patients, or we would have to do this with our patient, or our hospital service would all of a sudden look like this, without having those of us who are doing the work involved. And that was untenable for me. I couldn't take it much longer than I did, because I felt like we on the front line know what our patients need, not administrators. Of course, we all know that here on this call here. And then finally, I have always felt long before medical school that some of the social determinants of health, I knew about those, having lived through them. I knew that poverty kept people from accessing healthcare. I knew that people working too many jobs was interfering with their basic needs. Knew all of those things, that education was the determinant. So going home and having my clinic ignore all of those and not listen when I tried to get us involved in our tribal government so that we could start to address some of those things in healthcare, that was just too much. All of those combined, being overworked, having our clinic not address the social determinants of health, and then having no control of the job. When the University of Minnesota called a second time, I said, okay. So moved out here to take this job. Lots of learning experiences out here. They took me, I think, because, well, one of the people who was working in the center at that time knew me as a student, had supported me as a student, and wanted me to be the director. So they waited and harassed me to come out. And but they got someone who knew nothing about academia. So they had someone who fit the mission in that I was raised in a rural area, raised in poverty, and was American Indian and involved in my community. They got all those pieces. They got someone who lived what they were looking for, lived what their mission is. But they also got someone who had not done research, who had not written much, who knew how to be bossy, and but didn't know what leadership meant. And it's taken me 7 years to finally put all this together. And I think I'm at the space where if I were looking for someone to hire, I'd choose me at this point, finally. I don't know that I could say that in the beginning. But some of what I've learned for you all that I will share with you today and then take your questions are that on the leadership piece, that leadership is so much more than having great ideas and suggesting that people do them. What I learned in this role is that one of the keys is that it's important just to sit back. If I had it to do it over again, I would have sat back that first year and just watched. Let people do everything that they were doing and just watched and learned. As it was, I was told that I had to have a vision when I came in. And so I thought, okay, I better have a vision, better start moving people around, and did that. And that was a critical error. I did exactly what I hated having done to me in the clinic. And I didn't ask people who were on the ground doing the work. Well, I did, but I also was in Minnesota where they don't tell you, they just don't respond. So if I had sat back for a year, though, I would have learned that that's the way that they tell me things. And I would have somehow received that message a little bit better. I think that's my thought on how I would approach that now. I would recommend to anybody, though, to sit on your hands for that first year. Think about breech babies. Sit on your hands and let things happen. And take notes all along the way. Before that, though, what I would recommend to you is a program like BINGAP. And I'm not paid to say that. But I think what you learn from BINGAP are the things that I was missing. You learn to take all your experiences and record them on that nice program that the AAMC has for a CV. You learn that research is important, even if you don't think that you're never going to use it in your clinic time. It's important to know when those researchers come to your clinic and they say, this is what we want to do, you have an idea of what they're talking about. You know all about the mechanisms of an IRB. You can also understand, that'll help you start to understand how different IRBs are. For instance, the tribal informed IRBs are completely different from the university, and it's really cool. So getting the privilege of understanding those differences and that background. Also, you'll learn about, again, what some writing skills and the importance of writing regularly. And it's amazing how much I think you can improve your writing by writing regularly. I've heard a lot of people say it, and anytime you hear, that's another tip, is anytime you hear enough people saying something, there's got to be some truth in there. Learn that one the hard way. So be prepared as possible. One way is through that BINGAP program, but however you need to. Exposure, running to the fire is one way that I've heard people say this. So if there's something happening, if you can get in and get involved and find out exactly the mechanism of whatever that is that you want to learn about, be it research, be a code happening, obviously don't be too many people at that code, but you're running to the experience anytime that you can, that you have the ability to. Build community. One of the most important things that I have done correctly is reaching out everywhere that I can where there might be Native students, over to the undergrad on the other side of campus, to all the minority serving support groups, to the pharmacy, anywhere within the community, the high school, anywhere I can find there might be even a couple, because it doesn't take many natives. I've reached out and built at least a relationship with those folks. And you don't have to collaborate with them right away. You're just letting them know who you are and that you're interested in serving students. The other thing is, as you start to think, as even now, where your passion is, and start to hone that. One of the critical mistakes I made was taking too long to figure out where my passion was. I don't know if I could change that. I'm just a slow thinker maybe, but it's taken me a while to realize now that my niche is in this idea of autonomy, the autonomy that comes from education, from I'm working on it from the education, that education will bring you autonomy. Education brings you the ability to control your life. And that autonomy is critical to health. It's taken me the 7 years, though, to be able to hone that down and figure out who I want to work with to advance that for in Indigenous communities, that message. But once you figure that out, where you're going, then you start to build an algorithm in your mind, algorithm, so to speak, of who is going to help you get there, who in your network is going to fit that mission. And then as people approach you, you figure out, do they fit this mission, this thing that I'm going, and you're going to need to do this because you are going to get 1,000 people calling and wanting you to give a presentation or do this or do that or join their collaboration. And you're going to need to ask yourself, does this fit the work that I want to do? And if it doesn't, then you categorize it. Is it way out there in left field? Okay, respond, thank you very much. Is it close? Say, and then you might say, I really am interested in that. I just don't have the capacity right now. And they can, and let them know when, and they can reach back to you. Or is it something that you want to do now? And then make some general rules for yourself. For me, it's students. Students call and ask, I do it, period. I do it. Well, you know, I guess there'd probably be some qualifiers on there, but for most students, right? I will do it. When corporations call, this is just my thing. I'm not saying what your guys' have to be. I generally will pass and say, no, you guys get to do that one. It's just not my gag. But you have to build your own personal algorithm. And then, let me see. Oh, and then once you find your niche, then you have to grow the people who are interested in it. You've got to expand your network again, even further. So for instance, for this one that I'm interested in with education, one of the ways that I did that was working through AAIP to have the education summit a few weeks ago, where we reached out to people around the country to help refine our pipelines so that they're not a pipeline of students coming from California to Minnesota or to the East Coast, but getting more students who are from this region so that we're more likely to support the students who are going to serve in this region. So by doing so, increasing those networks of people who are going to support the things that I'm interested in. And as the current leader of AIP, I get to do that, but then someone else will have their mission that they get to bring to AIP. So that's in a nutshell. I think those are all my little nuggets. I don't see anything else written here. So now let's open for questions and have some dialogue from you folks. With purposeful and significant change most often being gradual and slow, what do you do to maintain your resiliency? What helps you maintain the journey? That's an excellent question. Last year in particular was really difficult. I think a lot of us felt it, but there were no other, something important to think about as you go along in this journey, particularly if you're from, as a Native American person, I come from an impoverished background, so I have that, I wear that. I have a very high level of education, so I wear that. And I'm Native, and I'm also involved socially, or involved in politics. I'm a socialist. All of those things together make a pretty narrow range of folks, right? There are not many folks who I would really be able to sit down and cry with about the things that happened last year. And I needed that, like many of us did. It was so painful just thinking about last year, you know, and there was no one around. There weren't even people, they didn't have to be a socialist, but there weren't even other people of color who were feeling that pain around me. So I had to reach far. I had to reach down to the Twin Cities to find the people who were connecting on what happened to George Floyd and what was happening in our communities with COVID. And I found those folks, but they're 200 miles or 150 miles that way, 2 hours that way. But Zoom opened up this community, and so we could connect that way. I connected by telephone, but I don't know that I would have survived if I hadn't found those folks. I fell into a depression again, or my depression got worse again last year. And without them, without having family around, I don't know that I would have been able to stick through this. But, and then also patience from my colleagues, because there were times when I was extremely moody and had to even leave Zoom occasionally because the depression would take over and I'd start getting teary. It was, I think other people, it looks like, were relating to that. So I agree that this is such a slow process that you have to think about your resiliency all the time. And my strength comes from, as I built those networks, I found people who were doing some of the same work and who are interested, have the same passion. And those people are the folks who help me in the resiliency. That in I happen to have a family. My husband's very active in the community with political activism, and we go out and we do things to serve other people, and that keeps me alive. I couldn't do this if I didn't know that we were doing something at some level. If we weren't for here, it's the camps, the camps on the pipeline, getting involved in those, or getting involved with the NAACP and bringing masks to folks early in the pandemic. Anything I can to be involved locally keeps me alive. And it's the only thing I can do for resilience. That's what I do mostly for resilience. As I get older, I can't turn to fancy food as much because nobody can afford to have that extra cholesterol. So we got to turn to other things like helping others. What do other people down here do? I don't see any other questions. So let's get some conversation going. I'm up to other ideas or other questions. All right, I told you guys I'm going to pick on you if I don't hear anything. JP, what got you through this? Dr. Sanchez.
As you were sharing, Dr. Owen, let me just say, you're such an inspirational leader, and I want to thank you for staying the course, being authentic, dedicated, focusing not only on your community, but other communities, which I think is really important. That not everyone focuses on several communities. So I want to thank you for that, and for always extending yourself to work with me and others. And congratulations once again on your exemplary award on diversity from the Association of American Medical Colleges, which is just testimony of how many of us feel about you across the country. And as you were sharing, what you were going through with your communities, I was like, we got to have you come down here so we can cook you some home cooked meals, and just spend that time maybe doing some hikes or whatever would allow you a pause, and just to be together again. So you let us know when you might have a moment to come down to Albuquerque, and we can tour the state and just figure out what would be best, and check out Bow and Arrow, Dr. Begay brewery. But I think similar to you, I think staying connected to family and friends and having these moments, right? Although it's Zoom, just having these moments with you and everyone on the call is rejuvenating, and reminds me of the importance of staying committed and dedicated, and then just having downtime. I really just take downtime, and as you know, writing. So for me, and we've spoken a lot about this, what we experience in our communities and within our medical schools needs to be written about and published. Because my experience with academic medicine is that if it's not published, it's not as valued as much. It may not be fair, it might be a structural barrier, but I do think that's a part of the culture of academic medicine. And I think there's still a lot of space for us to share the narratives of our Native American communities, our African American communities, our Hispanic Latino communities, our LGBT communities in various literature forms. So when you come down, besides hiking and going to bow and arrow, we could also spend some time writing.
Yeah, that's another, well, I already mentioned that tip. It's so huge, I think, as part of academia, and I think it serves us in so many other ways. Dr. Begay is one of the reasons I love working with her on the board of AAIP is that she has that same vision that we cannot do this alone, and that we need to expand our membership and expand way beyond what we've traditionally thought of as AAIP. So, she's talked to me about how NMA does it, and other groups have talked about how NMA does it. And I think there's so much wisdom there. We need to be serving other Native American health professionals, nursing, pharmacists, whatever, bring them in. And AAIP has also recently joined the Multicultural Physicians with Dr. Elena Rios and the other leaders of groups, because as we saw with COVID, it's our communities that get hit over and over and over. And only by joining forces together are we going to win or be louder than those ridiculous voices that tell us we don't need public health and other things that harm our communities. So it's all of us doing this work together, I think, is the point. And the other big point, besides Dr. Begay just being bright in general, really bright, is that she's common among young people. Young people are giving me hope that they're not going to put up with this silliness anymore. And they're going to be a critical mass that's going to change things. Like I said, it was 20 years ago I knew this had to happen, and it's just now happening. And it's largely because of them. The critical mass saying, this is not, we're not going to accept this. We want a different curriculum. And they did that here at our school, which was really cool.
Dr. Owen, I have a question for you. You mentioned two things. One is, it is true. I think the question of who is a Native American, what is the role of identity as we move forward into the next 50 years, that is something not only tribal leaders grapple with, but organizations like AAIP. What do you think composes, what are going to be some of those key pieces that compose Native American identity, like 50 years from now? In your work that you do, I'm so thankful that our organization involves Native American tribes from all over the country, and from Alaska, Hawaii, even our Canadian brothers and sisters. But what do you think some of those key components of identity are going to be in the next 50 years? Is it still going to be language, culture? What do you see? I know it's a difficult question, but from your perspective and all that you've seen, what is that going to look like?
From my perspective, it's the connections with your community. And that's the one that I ask students when they come in here. It's not enough to say that you are 3-4 Seminole. You could be 3-4 Seminole and not care about your community. And so I'm looking for folks who are committed and can prove that. Now, right now, I'll tell you, we are having the most painful battle within our with our medical students right now, and feeling like one among them is a fraud, and wanting to out that person. And I have had meeting after meeting with them, and finally I've called so many different elders to help me through this problem, because I'm not wise enough to do it on my own. And I think that that's what it's going to take with AAIP, is we're going to need a council of folks coming together, young and old, to help us define how we're going to move forward. And that's what I'm thinking will be the work of this coming year, is defining that. We're not going to make everybody happy, but there's a really cool book out that my husband keeps reading to me every single night while I'm trying to sleep. But it includes, it's about how so much of the Renaissance was framed after the ideas of Native Americans, stuff that has never been told before or written about in a massive way. That's now a New York Times bestseller. You can't even get your hands on it. But about how we used to have councils of Native people who would just sit around and debate things. It was common. So I think that's what we need for this kind of issue that's so touchy, so painful, so raw. We need councils of people coming together to decide this, and we need that with AIP. It doesn't matter really what I think, because I'm just one Indian. We need lots. We need your thoughts. We need other. I have always been impressed with AIP. I was once lost an election, and Joy Dorsher said to me, "It's okay. The membership knows." And I've seen that happen over and over and over. They know who to choose, when to choose them. And I think that they'll get it right with this one too, but we need to have a wise council.
Thank you.
It's not a straightforward answer. Dr.
Right. I knew it wouldn't be, but we have a membership committee meeting tonight, so it's on my mind. I have been at many of those debates with 40 Native, 50 Native physicians debating each other. It's you learn a lot. My second question, you do. My second question has to do with Native American medical students. You mentioned some of the issues that students still grapple with that you've experienced, namely racism. But what advice could you give to Native American medical students? Some of them may be on this meeting, on how to be a better advocate for themselves. If they find themselves in spaces where maybe there's not many of them, maybe there's not a lot of support. How could students advocate for themselves, and what tips do you have for students to make sure that when they do face issues like the one you mentioned, that they feel they are supported?
One thing I think is important is to recognize that no matter how you deal, and to give yourself some grace, no matter how you deal with it was the right way for you at that moment. Because we never expect these events, right? They always come when our guard is down, it seems to me. It's when I'm walking up to the counter in a really good mood that someone slaps me down for being Indian, So you got to give yourself some grace. The next thing I'd say is, if you are able to think about what it looks like to respond in the way that you want to respond. Maybe you're not able to pull that up that moment that it happens. Oftentimes what happens to me is something will happen and I don't recognize it until later, and it'll be like, and again, I told you I'm kind of slow. I'll be like, what? And then it'll hurt. There are other moments, and I was just talking with John about this as well, my husband, that I think the times that I feel that I want to do something most about are those moments like our students are going through right now, where you just shake when you think about it. When you explain it again, you shake. It hurts you that much. How do we get relief to those students so they're not shaking so much or not feeling it every time they talk about it and it gets in the way of their work? Because that's what happens, right? It interferes with everything that we're doing for days sometimes. The incident that I told you about, what happened was there was a zoological professor who came to do a lecture when I was in medical school, and he was talking about his work before becoming whatever he was. And he said he used to work in these meat packing plants. And he said, the minorities there, boy, you wouldn't believe how big and ugly they were. And so at first I thought, no, I must be crazy. I couldn't have heard that. I looked around, nobody reacted to it. But then one of my classmates came up to me after and said, hey, did you hear what that guy said? And I said, he did say it. I can't believe that. And so being who I am, I went out immediately and confronted him and said, who do you think you are? What was that about? And he said, oh, I knew you were going to come up to me. I wasn't talking about Indians. I was talking about Blacks. And yeah, it was so unbelievable in so many ways. And it took me until just the last maybe 10 years, it took 10 years before I didn't shake when I was telling that story, because it was so painful. And that's what our students are going through right now. I'm personally getting them involved in ceremony. Here, they're going to be involved in a pipe ceremony. We did a talking circle. They're going to do a moon ceremony. In fact, I need to organize that one really soon. Because I think that brings healing to people, being more involved in ceremony. Someone asked me the other day, how do we get Indigenous students? You don't get Indigenous students until you've built support for them. So whatever your group of students that you're trying to appeal to, you need to have that support ahead of time so they don't come in, run into this, and then aren't able to process that somehow, or you're not able to take care of it for them. It's not their job to take care of that. Their job is to survive medical school, right? So they can be intact for our communities. So as far as the students getting healing, if your program's offering some sort of let your faculty know that it's happening. First of all, talk to them, because they don't know otherwise. I'm not in that classroom with my students anymore. I have no idea if there's something crazy happening. So let your faculty know. And then hopefully your faculty is able to respond with what it is you might need, like some traditional programming. Or it might be that you have a student who's not at all traditional. Then you've got to find something else to serve them in some way. But I've been surprised how many students are helped, even the ones who think that they're not, who are not initially traditional, how much the healing they get from that. I think it's just being in community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when AIP wasn't able to have their annual meeting, we still had a virtual meeting. And one of the experiences that I really enjoyed or got a lot of strength from last year was the women's circle, and the way we still had the virtual drum from Hawaii and all the women dancing in their living rooms. That was cool? That was like one of the coolest things that happened last year. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Another question from the chat is, what advice or guidance would you provide to students, staff, and other people of color to develop the strength to not be silent?
Well, I don't tell anybody they shouldn't be silent. That might be that they might need to be silent at that moment. So I guide people in doing what you can in that moment. But the things to help you not be silent, the things that have worked for me, I'm a little bit privileged in that I grew up with a dad. I think I mentioned this on the AAIP thing. He had an eighth grade education, and despite that, he was always down at City Hall pounding his fists on the table, saying, "I deserve to be listened to, and that community deserves to be listened to. You're going to listen." So it's easier for me to stand up. But when I'm not able to, the things I do to help myself, actually, it was one of our AAIP members who said this so well. She was nervous about giving a talk. It was, she does plant medicine. She's so, Katya Adachi. She was going to give a plant medicine talk, and she was really nervous. And her boyfriend, now husband, said to her, "It's not about you. You got to always remind yourself, this work that we do isn't about us. It heals us. It's good for us, but it's not about us. I'm not doing this. I'm not talking up to that professor so that he doesn't harm me anymore. Sure, I am in some sense, but I'm also doing it for my community so that he doesn't go out and continue to harm other people." And remember that. I think that helps you. When I get up in front of the school board, which is too frequent for their taste, I'm sure, it's reminding myself that there's a high school graduation rate of 50% here. Sorry, I get so angry about it for Native students. That's what charges me up to that podium to talk back to people. So think about those statistics. Think about the people who are dying of shame from things they have no reason to die of shame from. Think of those people who need you to stand up for them. It works, I think.
Thank you. So another question from the chat. What are your thoughts on the benefits and challenges of establishing Native American medical schools or regional campuses similar to HBCU and the 4 medical schools in Puerto Rico?
Unfortunately, I haven't thought enough about that. It's kind of gone across my mind, but you're always thinking of different solutions, right? I'd be curious what other people on here think about it. I mean, initially, it sounds really cool. Dr. Begay, what do you think about it? Oops.
So I've been having a lot of conversations about this actually in the last week, but I think one of the things that you mentioned is that wherever you go, politics are involved, politics of the tribe. And I think, each nation is sovereign. Each tribe has its own unique issues. Like we have found in the Health Regional Summit, when we broke down each region has its own unique problems that they understand from so many, from a 360-degree view, that I think making sure that medical schools are in some way led by tribes or by, the community has a big stake in this. I think that's the only way that's going to be successful. And that's something that I learned from the regional summit. I used to think it was only universities or, large academic centers, but I realized from the summit that it really is going to have to come from tribes and communities. So that's my thought on it. I don't know what others think. I could call on what about Arthur? Arthur, I like your background. It looks a little bit Harry Potterish, but.
Well, right now, I'm married to a Cherokee woman. My wife is Cherokee Indian. She's from Oklahoma, and I'm African American. So it's dynamic in the fact that a lot of our family went to the historical Black colleges and universities, and right now, the Cherokee Nation is developing an orthopedic program in medicine, and having two concerns. Because number one, kind of straight speaking, we need each other. We all need each other. And I think we recognize that. The part that's difficult is the continued strength. And that's why I asked the question of trying to work through this and not isolate ourselves. Because historically we were told to be isolated. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword because of the nature of who we are as people. We're giving people, despite the fact of all the challenges, but there's a very real gulf that people don't want to try to cross anymore to keep us together. And so I'm concerned because I still think we can learn from each other and be together as a group of people. I watched a movie the other night of a Native woman. She was a storyteller called Teate. And basically, she went to Washington, D.C., and her whole goal was bringing her Kiowa folks together with all these other groups. But the resistance from her people was always there because of the historical trauma, which we all know about. And, having worked for Native tribes and IHS historically, there's all kind of things that we could go through. So I think there's a challenge that Indian country is really struggling with, to want to maintain this connectivity to society, but also equally challenged to pull away and become self-resilient, because of their own medicines and things. And so obviously the historical Black colleges are doing that too. But the way our system's set up, I don't know if that can be possible.
Missy, I think, or Dr. Begay, your comment about the sovereignty is so huge. So you'd almost, if you did one of those, you'd almost have to have a council of different nations, right? Leading it to make sure it was done in a good way. And then the drawback to that is right now, because I'm in a school that is not focused, it has an Indigenous health mission, but it's not obviously an Indigenous college. I bring my message to all of these non-natives on how best to take care of or how to approach our communities and what things that I think that they absolutely need to know. It's essential. And so if we were in those schools, would we have as much of that crossing over of that message that all these folks who take care of Native patients need to know? I love the idea of that strength of a school that's only Native, but I agree there are some concerns I would have.
Mm-hmm.
Great conversation.
Yeah. So I hope you can see the chats as well. Thank you for these powerful words, for your tremendous courage and commitment. Could you share one other question is, could you share a little bit of the plans for the 50th anniversary of the Association of American Indian Physicians in July?
Who's that question from? Is that from you, Dr. Begay?
That is from Dr. Sanchez.
I'm just kidding you. The plans are to make this big and bold and to grow our voice. And to do that, we're going to invite all these different groups that I told you about, the nurses, Native nurses, Native pharmacists. We're also going to be reaching out to different specialties. We have Dr. Lori Alvord, who's very interested in building a specialty group within AAIP, at least a subgroup for surgeons, and we'd like to do that for other groups as well. We will have a early on in the meeting, before the meeting starts on the 27th, we're going to have a week dedicated to the summit and education. So faculty, Native faculty will be coming together, as well as all the regions for education. So I'm hoping that we could do a bin gap there as well. But we really need to focus on, and also the other multicultural physician groups are going to be there, which is really exciting. So I'm going to ask Elena, and I'm sure she will say yes if she's available. Dr. I'm blanking on the names right now because I'm talking with you. I was just on a call with them, but all the leaders of the different groups, the NMA, whoever their president is at the moment, and the Asian Pacific, and then the LGBTQ, GLAMA, which I love the name of, all those different groups to build solidarity to serve our communities. That's the main theme. And then looking back and looking back, present, and forward. And the forward to me is the larger voice. And I think we have a good, I pushed Luke John to run because I think he carries the same message, our next president. So hopefully we can get a train of folks coming through the presidency who are as passionate about expanding our voice and building collaborations with other groups. Those are the main things. Oh, and as our keynote speaker, I don't know if anybody gets as excited as my nerdy self, but one of the keynote speakers is Michael Marmot. So internationally known for his work with social determinants of health and particularly with autonomy. So exciting, nerdy stuff. Anything else? Yeah, I think it will be amazing. Hopefully you're there, JP. I know that Norma's planning on being there, if that's any help.
Well, we at UNM, we already have some funds to support faculty and students in attending, and I've started sending out information for people to attend the 50th anniversary. So I think it's a big year. It's the 50th anniversary for AIP. It's the 50th anniversary for LMSA. It's the 25th anniversary of NHMA. So we're going to be seeing each other a lot. Dr. Owen, we're going to have some great times this year.
That's cool. One of the things we just did this year is Elena sent us, Dr. Rios, who's head of NHMA, sent us a notice saying that they were having their scholarship dinner. And so I unilaterally decided that AIP needs to support that with the recognition that this is going to go around. We're going to each support each other. So we sent them some money for their scholarships, and I'm sure they're going to do the same in turn. Just again, growing that network of support for each other. So yeah, thank you, JP. That's so exciting to hear. Being here with you guys has warmed my heart. So miigwech gunashish. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Owen. One question that I had for you is, where do you find the best up-to-date information on issues related to Native American health?
Go ahead.
We talk about this a lot because we're connected, but yet there's so many people doing such amazing work all over the country that sometimes I feel like there's not a central place. But where do you find the best information?
I don't think there is no one place, right? The data is all over when you can get it. Like, for instance, CDC put out a new report on our mortality statistics, right? But when was the last time we saw that? 2014? Because the trends data from the Indian Health Service is no longer coming out. So we got a big hole in the data. So that's a problem. Melvina McCabe, Dr. Melvina McCabe, who you guys know well, recently got ticked off at the CDC because they put out a report on OB statistics, I believe. I can't remember what it was. And they didn't include Native Americans. So she wrote an angry letter to them. And then within 2 weeks, we saw this data on so I don't know if it was because of her, but I think we need to do more of that. And so AIP is planning a meeting with the CDC to ask them to do it more regularly. Stop saying you don't have enough data on us. That's bull honky. Put it out there for us. So that's one. Wherever you can. That's not a great message. The other one is that there are certain places where research is being done, like for instance, and you just, unfortunately, we hear about it willy-nilly, right? We're in tune to Indian Country Today. Where'd they get that report? We're in tune to Native America Calling or to our emails between one another. And that's weird, right? We're in academia. We shouldn't have to hear willy-nilly, but that's the way it is. There is no central, you're right. Do you have an idea behind that question? Whoever said it, because I'm curious. It'd be a great effort.
So it was my question. And I think it is because of the news that I heard on the CDC. And when I was doing research on a paper that I wrote last year on COVID in Native communities and, the power of technology, it was really hard to find this data.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something maybe AAIP could do in terms of when we rebuild our website, making sure that we have links to some of these sources and to hold people accountable.
Has a nice, don't you guys still have that really nice site in your library? Isn't that you guys who has that online portal for data?
The Southwest, you're talking about the Southwest Research Institute? I'm not sure if anybody knows.
I thought there was a health library or something. I'll have to find it again. But
yes, there was a.
Go ahead.
There was a Native librarian in the UNM Health Sciences Center, Helen So, who compiled a lot of this data for us. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but yes, we did house a lot of that data. This is probably like about 5-6 years ago.
Arthur just put in here, Dr. Culpepper just put in here, infrastructure dollars appear to share new dollar. What would be kind of cool is if AIP developed an initiative with different colleges to come together to make a resource bank. And it could be virtual, like you say, and built off of that website that those guys don't know. Dr. Begay is behind building for AIP. So I love that idea. It's so needed because it takes so long to put anything together when we do these presentations because we have to look in 50 million different places. And then before long, it's outdated, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I know people have to get to their next events. And Dr. Owen, you have so much work in front of you. I know this. So I want to thank you again for sharing your experiences, your perspective, and really, I do really thank you for taking time out to speak to our community. We really need it, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Tomorrow night.
For those of you, tomorrow night. And for those of you, AAIP can be found at www.aip.org, where you can sign up for the conference. You are invited to our events, and you are invited to be considered for membership. We have an ally membership category where you don't have to be Native American, but we do want you to be a part of our community. So thank you, Dr. Owen.
Miigwech. Love to all.
Being awesome.
Okay.
But let me also give special thanks to, on behalf of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Health Sciences Center, I want to thank Dr. Begay for once again helping us pull together Native American Heritage Month, and for her leadership. Congratulations again, Dr. Owen, on your prestigious award through the AAMC, and for everyone for joining us today. Much work to be done, but we can do it together. Take care.